we're going to do a little runner by runner guide. Take a look at each horse. Never, for some of them, we might not go into too much detail. Now, got to say, we got to address the fact that it's impossible to dismiss any one horse. I mean, famously, obviously, Monmouth won at 100-1, 13, 14 years ago? I think 2008. I think that was when Monmouth won. Mm-hmm. So you can't say with any certainty that there's no way a certain horse doesn't win. But obviously, we don't have time to take a close look at every runner.
40 runners. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get underway, I guess. We'll go in numerical order. The only sensible way to do it, which means we start off with Bristol de Mai. There's top weight, a horse with significant class and pedigree, I suppose. Not a horse that I'll be selecting, but one that you can't really dismiss easily.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because it's a great horse as well. So obviously it's really easy to track in the national as well. But that 11 stone 10 is way too much in my opinion. Like I start to struggle when you go past like 11.5, 11.6, but 11.10 is too much for me. So yeah, unfortunately great horse, but I can't see it going the 4 miles over.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. As soon as I saw it in there, it definitely piqued my interest of it. Oh, great horse. And then saw the weight and said, I think I might just avoid that.
But if you're one of those people who loves backing gray horses, of which there are many, you can back Bristol de Mai at 28-1. Now, number 2, Chris's Dream, a horse that we did race at Cheltenham. We did mention in a couple of races at Cheltenham. Henry de Bromhead, Dara O'Keefe is riding, currently priced at around 40-1. I think one of those horses where it's shown some good form in Ireland, but this would be a significant step up if it were to get evolved.
Yeah, this is the textbook bet for a name kind of horse. Like we're saying, 40 horses, you're named Chris, you got a dream at 50-1, might be worth it.
Or if you think someone called Chris is dreaming about you, also might be the move. I mean, you are the dream of Chris, right? So who knows? Could apply to almost anyone out there. Horse number 3, Yala Enki. Horse that's been around for a while, so definitely well known. I think in part probably the popularity might be a little bit name related, just because it stands out a bit. Raced once previously at Aintree, and it fell. But again,
first as well.
Yeah. So again, that might mean totally
that's
meaningless.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting for me. I'm not backing it, but falling at the first means that you just don't know. Like you have no idea how well that horse would have jumped over the rest of them, for example. So it could be a great entity that just happened to have a bad jump at the start. But I'm not backing it. But it's an unknown entity that has been entered over these national fences. So they must have thought that it had some good pedigree over them. It's an interesting one, but not for me.
Yeah, and when you look at even recent performances, it finished 30 lengths behind Native River in February. So it either needs something incredible to happen in this race in terms of the number of horses that fall in front of it, or it does have to produce the race of its life in order to be in the mix. Number 4, Ballyoptic. Finished second in the Scottish National, so that's form that can be significant for the Grand National at times. Trained by Nigel Twiston-Davis. Sam Twiston-Davis will be on board. Big price, given the fact that it has shown some form in similar events. It is at 80-1 at the moment.
But keynote, it has fallen in its previous 2 attempts at the Grand National. So unless you're a big third time lucky kind of guy, you take the recent form on the course and it ain't looking too good.
Or if you support Burnley or Aston Villa or any other football team that plays in claret and blue, in which case I think the Silks are close enough to feel like you're picking something related to your football club. Horse number 5, definitely red. Guess one for any big roulette players out there. Horse that's been around for a while. Raced previously, pulled up in 2017. Sorry, hasn't been around for that long. Pulled up in 2017. Finished 4th in the Beecher Chase in 2019. Trained by Brian Ellison. Ridden by Henry Burke, 50-1. It's raced against Cloth Cap in recent races. Done okay. So Cloth Cap is the heavy favorite by Grand National standards. So on that form basis, 50-1 might be a little bit big, but again, won't be one of my selections.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the form it has in certain races that it's gone on has boded well for Grand National. Like you say, Cloth Cap being one of them, but also Kelso, where it ran last time out, is a good style of course similar to Aintree. It's got a lot of sharp turns. It's got a lot of fences where there are turns after it as well, which is quite important in the National because there's like the canal turn in the Grand National is very compressed into a single area. So it does give good experience. I actually think it's quite long odds, but the thing going for it is that it's a 12-year-old, which is usually a bad. Not many 12-year-olds win in the Grand National. So that's something going for it, but interesting.
And next you have Lakeview Ladd, another horse that's recently raced against Cloth Cap. Finished 22.5 lengths behind Cloth Cap at Kelso in March. Currently priced at around 66-1. Won the Many Clouds Chase in December at Aintree, so there's some course form there, but and does have the benefit of being ridden by Brian Hughes, so a nice jockey, nice experienced jockey on board. Currently priced at, as I said, 66-1. So on that basis, you might be able to give it an each way argument, but I'll be staying away. Then we have Burroughs Saint, the Irish Grand National winner in 2019. Trained by Willie Mullins, who obviously dominated the Cheltenham Festival. Very much in-form stable, ridden by Patrick Mullins. It is the best of the Mullins hopes and is joint second favorite at 10-1 currently. Conditions look like they'll suit. I think definitely has to feature in any considerations when making a selection. Are either of you backing Burroughs Saint?
No, I'm not. Fun fact though, obviously Mullins is so well known for his kind of jumps racing, but can you remember his last winner in the National? Tough question.
No, I cannot.
Because after proper, it's Hedge Hunter.
Okay, so it's been a while.
It's been about 15 years since Mullins had a winner, and I think it's something like he's had 40 runners and only one winner. And just look, don't get me wrong, obviously you've got 40 runners in the National. It's tough at the best of times, but interesting that there's a jumps trainer with such dominance in almost every race, and then there's a marquee one where really there isn't that dominance. But Burroughs Saint looks a great horse, but actually there's a horse it ran against that I really fancy. So I'm going against
Sam,
Burroughs
are you gonna
Saint.
A teaser. We didn't think we'd get a teaser in here.
You're getting a teaser.
Well, I am fully on board with Sam. I don't know if it's the same tease or doing different teases, but there is a horse, and I'll tease mine even further.
We only have to wait till number 9. We only have to wait till number 9.
Well, then guess what? I'm going to steal your thunder because I'm going with the other Mullins horse that it routinely races against.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll wait till number 9, but that's,
okay.
We're on great. I love we're on the same board because it never works out well.
So no one's going for Burroughs Saint and actually kind of openly opposing it almost. So listeners should probably throw some money on Burroughs Saint. Number 8 is Magic of Light. Finished second in the Grand National in 2019, which is the last running of the Grand National because it didn't take place last year. And obviously the previous winner of the Grand National, Tiger Roll, is not featuring in the race this year.
Boom.
Instead lost today on the opening day of the Aintree Festival. Currently priced at around 20 to 1. I think the live price that we're getting through, 20 to 1 through the official bookmaker of the Big Chill podcast. Are either of you expecting that Magic of Light will go one better this year?
I mean, at 20 to 1, it is a little tempting to put something on it because obviously course form is so important. And when you're coming off a second to arguably one of the best Grand National champions there are in Tiger Roll, you have to respect the horse. And at 20 to 1, that's a pretty lack of respect when you compare it to some of the other horses around it.
I'm not going for it, but it's in the kind of right realms. So weighted well. The handicap has got to it. So I think the handicapping for the national happened around mid-end of Feb. So whatever happened in March doesn't matter too much, but it ran a bit of a stinker at Cheltenham in 2 mile 5. And what was interesting about that one is it kind of struggled on its way up. Kind of at the end. So I'm a little bit concerned about it, but it's in the right kind of brackets for a national winner. So I think it's hard to oppose, but I am opposing it.
And now we get to the horse that was teased a little while ago, and which clearly is the selection of both Frank, or one of the selections of both Frank and Sam. That's number 9, Acapella Bourgeois. Another Mullins horse. It beat Burroughs Saint in last time out and is currently priced at around 33 to 1, I believe. Yep. So tell us why it's your selection.
Shall I go first? Or
go for it?
Okay, I'll go first. So as you mentioned, like it beat Burroughs Saint at Fairyhouse at the national meet, so the Irish national meet, but not in the Irish national. What was interesting about that though was the weights, because it gave weight to Burroughs Saint, beat it, and now is coming into this well handicapped, or maybe even under handicapped. Maybe the handicap has looked at it badly. So it's going into this race at 10-12. And that still gives it less weight, I believe, than Burroughs Saint, which I find pretty strange in that respect. So I think Burroughs Saint's coming in maybe at like 10-13. So that seemed like a bit of a weird one for me. I think the handicap has got it a little bit wrong there, but also the form that Acapella Bourgeois has, it always runs on New Year's against Album Photo. So regardless of what we think about how much that horse tries in that race, it's still a good set of pedigrees and good racing form that it does have. But just going a little bit further from it, it has a good pedigree on softer ground. I don't think rain or shine. I think kind of Aintree is looking good for the conditions at the moment. Danny Mullins as a jockey, granted, is a bit of like a second preference, but has ridden the horse before. The 11-year-old aspect of Acapella Bourgeois kind of is a slight concern, but actually, if you look at its last runs over the past few years, I'd actually say it's aging better. Like the horse is getting better with age. So for me, I think 33 to 1 I think it's a bit of a crazy price. I thought when I read this, I tried to look at the horse's entries before the odds, which is extremely borderline impossible. But I would have seen this as like a 20 to 1 horse. Or an 18 to 1 horse, something like that. So 33 to 1 for me is a bit crazy. I think there's a really good value on it. I think it's got a really good pedigree, and I think everything's going for it. So I'd probably say this is like one of my best values, maybe even my tip for it.
Yeah, I'm right there with Sam. Basically, everything he said was the same kind of consensus I came to. I think it's one of my top 3 selections that I'm going to actually give. The other thing that you can argue too, or that people would argue against you, is that Burroughs Saint won the Irish Grand National in 2019 and beat Acapella Bourgeois. But again, the weights were way off there. So you're at much better terms in this race. So even though it had lost to Burroughs Saint in 2019, when you switch the weights, it probably wouldn't have lost that race. So I agree. Something didn't seem right to me. So either it's just something the handicappers missed, or there's another side of the story that Mullins isn't telling everyone and knows that Burroughs Saint is just primed for this race and Acapella Bourgeois is not.
Well, you made a good case for it. Still not one of my selections, but you definitely, the both of you, have given the listeners good reason to make me make it their selection. Number 10 is Talk is Cheap. Won the Bet365 Gold Cup in 2019. Basically, hasn't done much this season. Only raced twice. Last time out, finished 12th of 17. Not a very impressive performance, but clearly the target for this season was the Grand National. So I think you can throw out everything it's done so far this season because it was just about priming it for this race at Aintree. Currently priced at 66 to 1. In spite of the fact that this was the goal and that Alan King has produced a few good horses this season, not one I'm going to be interested in. Tempt either of you?
It tempts me a little just because it does have that Gold Cup win, and then basically they seem to almost kind of not shut it down, but obviously gear it towards this race. I mean, it hasn't raced in a distance anywhere near that. I think one race it even raced in an under 2 mile race. You know, it seems like all signs were it won the Gold Cup. Now let's prime it for the Grand National, and let's not worry about anything until we get to the Grand National. So it did tempt me a little, but I'm going to stay away.
Up next, number 11 is Tutte Perme, which is a horse currently priced, I think, as big as 125 to 1 in some places. It's not a bold prediction to rule out a horse at 125 to 1, but its jumping was very unreliable in its last performance. And I'm not going to take a horse that struggled in sort of easier conditions to suddenly handle the 30 obstacles in front of it in the Grand National. So for that reason, I'm dismissing it. I know it's a bold move from 125 to 1 shot, and if it storms home now, it will be egg all over my face, but it doesn't interest me. Looks like that's a consensus pick. Up next, Annabelle Fly, who good form in recent times. Finished 4th and 5th in the last 2 runnings. So I suppose if you're looking for an each way bet, history would tell you that Annabelle Fly is a good way to go. Currently priced at around 28 to 1. So similarly, if you're going each way and you're getting quarter odds, probably with most bookmakers on the Grand National. If not, you're getting a fifth of the odds, but you should get a quarter of the odds in most places. Quarter of the odds at 28 to 1. Sounds interesting to me for a horse that's placed in the last 2 outings. £9 lower than it was last time. Frank, Sam, interest either of you?
That's a key point there, because that I've obviously now benchmarked Acapella Bourgeois' race for a number of reasons. So Annabelle Fly obviously had to come into it. It did get beaten by 18 lengths, but there was like a big weight against it versus Burroughs and Acapella Bourgeois. So there was stuff going for it. I think maybe the ground's a little bit too dry for Annabelle Fly, personally. I think it prefers the kind of heavier side of soft. So that might be one of the issues. But it did surprise me seeing the odds are better than Acapella Bourgeois. But you can't poorly consider it. Again, it fits into that slight sweet spot of age and weight as well for previous national winners, which I take importance of. So not to be shunned, but I am shunning it.
So Eddie, is this one of your picks then?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying, if you're out,
it kind of sounded like it was.
If you're listening and you're looking for good reason, if you actually want sound logic as to why you pick a horse, the fact that it is consistently placed in the Grand National and is now off a lower weight, it's about as good of an argument as you're going to get for any of these. So on those grounds, if you want to have a Grand National selection that you can defend even after it falls at the first, then this is the one to go for.
But then the person next to you could say, yeah, but it's looked absolutely miserable in its last 5 starts.
Yeah. So you're not wrong that national form matters, or at least form over national fences matters. But I've gone for another one. So there's a teaser there. There's another one that really I like.
Now, this is a name that's
Wait, Sam. Do we not have to go too much further to get that? Because if we have another pick that's the same, I don't so bad.
No, we have to go quite far.
Okay.
The next number 13, a horse that's going to tempt people, I'm sure, for a number of cheeky chappies out there, I'm sure are going to be tempted to pick Mr. Malarkey because of the name. Ran well in December at Ascot. Had a wind operation, and as Frank loves to say, when you've had the wind operation, it's the second run where you start to see the benefits, because first time out is where the horse has to get used to the idea that it breathes differently, and it's the second time where it feels the effects. So if you're looking for a horse that might improve, Mr. Malarkey, that's a decent reason to think it might run better this time. Trained by Colin Tizard, John Joe O'Neill on board. Well, John Joe O'Neill Jr., I suppose. 30.
That'll be a weird booking.
If John Joe O'Neill is on board, I think we can all abandon hope. But 33-1. Frank, is the wind up enough for you, or keeping your powder dry for a later selection?
Yeah, I'm keeping it dry for later selection.
Up next, number 14, Kimberlite Candy. Another one featuring up towards the top of the market, currently priced at 14-1, drifting slightly, it has to be said. Only raced once this year when it finished second. Was well in the running. Won the Kim Muir in 2019.
Yeah.
A lot of form points to it having every chance. Are either of you choosing it?
I am. This is my second choice. I think, we keep harping on experience on the course, and this is a horse that's gotten second twice in the Beecher Handicapped. So it knows the course. It knows how to jump here. It was, I think, last year was one of the favorites. Obviously they didn't run it, but it was high up on the favorites that year. They were aiming it and prepping it for that. So I think there's no reason to not think that they have that same mindset and that same mentality to obviously be prepping it for this race in particular. So I think this has a live shot.
All right. Well, next up, number 15, another horse that got some mention at Cheltenham. Any second now. Actually mixed it up. Kimberlite Candy was any second now was the 2019 Kim Muir winner. So I hope I'm not confused any listeners out there who've been wondering why I sort of added a victory to Kimberlite Candy that it shouldn't have had. But Kimberlite Candy has finished second in the last two outings of the Beecher Chase. So that's the form at Aintree that Frank referred to. But any second now, the 2019 Kim Muir winner, 10-1, I believe, currently. Is it are either of you 11-1, I should say.
11s.
One last time out. Does it interest either of you? That seems like it's a firm no, so I think we can move on to number 16, Balco de Flo. Ryanair Chase winner in 2018. So far this season has been well short of its best form. I don't think there's been anything to like about it so far, and that's fundamentally reflected in its current price, as you can find it at around 50-1, I believe. 66-1 currently. Unseated the rider at Cheltenham last time out. Hasn't really shown any good form this season and has run on several. This will be its 6th appearance this year. Another one that I think can be easily dismissed, but maybe one of you is expecting sort of return to form.
I honestly think that this horse would be nearer 100s if it wasn't Henry de Bromhead. I think it's quite an erratic jumper. It has a tendency to kind of kick a bit more on its jump, which I'm not a fan of. And how can you be in, like, when we're talking about a jump with 30 of them or a meet with 30 of them? The jumping isn't kind of up to code with me, and I think that showed when it unseated the rider at Cheltenham. Granted, over similar ground. Cheltenham's obviously a good test, good standard, but for me, I'm not seeing it. So it's a stay away for me.
And next, another horse that appeared at Cheltenham, Alpha des Obo, finished miles behind Tiger Roll at Cheltenham, which I think some people are seeing the fact that it finished fourth at Cheltenham as encouraging signs. I think it was something like 20 lengths behind. So then when you factor in how Tiger Roll raced today, maybe that form isn't quite as good as it looks just when you look at sort of, well, it finished fourth in a race, a fairly big race at Cheltenham. Currently priced at around 66 to 1. Ran in 2018 at the Grand National and fell. Another one that I can't see a lot of reasons apart from just random chance and luck to select. Number 18 is OK Corral. Now, Cheltenham was kind of dominated by horses with a Western theme. We have spoken about my love of the Wild West in the past. And
I was going to
guess-
ask you this.
Yeah, I guess if you're really into the Wild West, then maybe this is your horse. It won the Sky Bet Chase at Doncaster last year, only raced once this year, where it was pulled up. Difficult to give a reason as to why it will suddenly rise to the occasion on it, the most difficult test of its career. That's reflected in the fact that it's 80 to 1. In spite of the Western connections, I am going to be having to look elsewhere.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, really, because there's a point in the Grand National where price almost is worth the risk of an unknown quantity in a way. Like, we know this horse is capable. It had some good wins last season out, but the one time it's run was quite recently, but it never ran. It was always in the back, and it pulled up by 3 or 4 out, if I remember right from my notes. But, you know, Nicky Henderson is a good trainer. And when you've got like an unknown this season, 80 to 1 shot with a good trainer, good weight, relatively speaking, good weight. It's interesting. I'm not putting it in my bets, but I could see good reason why it's there, for sure. It's an interesting value proposition on what is an unknown, basically.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. And actually, a lot of what you've just said applies not to the unknown aspect, but does apply to number 19 in the field. You talked about risking it on an unknown quantity. I'm sure a lot of people out there, when making their selections, will be drawn in by the name Taking Risks, which seems as aptly named as you could possibly be for a Grand National runner. Has form through the Scottish National and the Sky Bet Chase. 40 to 1 at the moment, which you'd have to say maybe there's a little bit of value there based on that form. Ran very well last time out. I think 40 to 1 could nearly tempt me. It's nearly made the cut for me as an each way selection, but it just hasn't quite got there to make my sort of 2 or 3 that I'm going to be siding with. But I could definitely understand why someone would be selecting it.
Just not me. I mean, one of the reasons, to be honest, is it's very hard to like a 12-year-old in the Grand National. I can't remember the last time, looking at my notes, I think it was like Amberley House in 2004. Well, I can say that because I've got it on screen now. But yeah, I mean, a 12-year-old doesn't have usually a good hope of winning the Grand National. And there's usually a telling reason is that handicappers are more unfavorable to older horses because they've obviously ran more, they've got more understanding of how they run, etc. There's less unknowns about them. So that's one of the reasons why usually the weight can be a bit telling. And the fact that it's only going off at like 10.8, 10.9 as a 12 makes me kind of think that the chances are extremely slim.
Well, we finally made our way to one of my selections, number 20, Shattered Love. And I'm not doing this so much out of form, not out of name, but out of the fact that I believe that I have a bit of a hoodoo on me ever since I decided not to back Shattered Love when it won at the Cheltenham Festival.
2018.
In 2018. So for that reason alone, this is not a reason that anyone listening to this should also decide to back it. It did run reasonably well at Cheltenham last time out when it stayed reasonably well. Its jumping wasn't particularly fluent, which is cause for concern. I wouldn't encourage people to back this selection. I'm just saying that it has made the cut for me for reasons that make no sense, which sometimes in the Grand National is one of those things you have to do. At 40-1, it will be an each way selection. Does it tempt either of you?
No, it doesn't tempt me. I mean, it does have decent form, but all that form is, the distance is just not there. And it's only once ever tried to hit a distance similar to this, and it was pulled up in the Irish Grand National. So yeah, that's a stay away from me.
Run your own.
Now, just where I like to be. Now, a horse that a name that will be familiar to many is Jet. It's had some nice moments in the past. This seems a race too far for it from my perspective. Ran in the Beecher's Chase, was extremely well beaten. This just seems just too difficult of a task. Which is again reflected in the price. It's currently 66-1. I can't see many reasons to select it, but maybe one of you does.
Nope, not really from me, except Whaley Cohen's obviously an interesting one. Usually it's an interesting booking, Sam Whaley Cohen as a jockey. But yeah, for me, the form just isn't there. And also the pedigree of who it's running against, it hasn't really got any sort of times or metrics that go well with it. So Jet was, let's be honest, you're going to look over a lot of horses in this because you've got 40. At some point, you have to kind of home in. Jet was one of the ones that kind of failed that first pass for me. So yeah, it's a bit of a no-go for me.
And number 22, we have Lord Dumesnil, who won a trial at Haydock for the National. On paper, that looks like good form. If you watch the performance itself, it jumped very poorly. And again, that it showed great sort of tenacity and staying ability in the fact that it held on to win, but it was not fluent at any point. And for that reason, it was one of those horses that I marked down saying I did not want to have money riding on it when it suddenly swamped and swarmed with other horses around it and going over challenging obstacles. So that's the reason I'll be staying away. But on the basis of the kind of bare form of its previous outing, you could make an argument for it. I think it also has a question that this will be firmer ground than it's basically ever raced on, or at least ever raced successfully on. So those are two big question marks. That's probably enough to dismiss something from anyone's Grand National selection. But do either of you disagree?
No, I don't really disagree with your logic. I think it's an interesting bet. When I watched that Haydock race, you're right about the jumping, because what was interesting is it made up the gaps in between really well. So obviously on the flat, it's good. But in the National, when you've got 30 of them, you can't do that. You just can't keep jumping fluently. And also when there's going to be like interruptions with your jump, etc. If you're not perfectly fluent, well, to be honest, if you're not perfectly fluent, you could probably still go over them anyway, given luck. But for me, the question marks around its jumping are too considerable for me to consider it. But
and that brings us to a horse that seemingly is increasingly well backed, which is number 23, Potter's Corner, now in all the way to 20-1. Won the Welsh National in 2019. So there's no question marks over its staying ability, jumping ability. Definitely checks all of the necessary boxes. This has been the target for some time. So I think you can dismiss the fact that it was pulled up last time out. Also, that was on heavy ground, and now obviously very different conditions it's going to be racing in on Saturday. Personally, for me, it doesn't quite do it, but I can understand why it will tempt a few. Are either of you in that group?
I'm not in that group, but I also agree. There's clearly some logic to it. I mean, you said it won the Welsh National and also won the Midlands, which is the actual distance that the Grand National is, over 4 miles. So it clearly can stay. the issue is both of those wins were on heavy ground, and it's not going to get the heavy ground here. So even though it has the stamina to stay, it might still lack a little bit of that speed that it's going to need on the good to soft that you're probably going to get here. I'm going to stay away, but I see where it's coming from, because you have to feel good about a horse that at least you know is going to get this distance, right? Because that's half the battle. Is a lot of these horses, it's a crapshoot, and one of my picks is that way too. So to know definitively you have a horse that can make this distance, no issues. Yeah, the other thing you have to think about is it got third in Cheltenham in November on a pretty long race, right? So I think they were obviously aiming towards the national last year, and it seems like the races they've put it in are kind of aiming towards it, but it's on a pretty high weight, and I don't know. I'm gonna go elsewhere, but I think I still think decent value in it for, again, a horse you know is gonna stay this distance.
Didn't it win the virtual national last year as well?
Well, there's a good reason to
Ooh.
back it. Actually, in some
Yep.
ways, I almost feel like that's a reason to not back it, because the storyline is too good that it's going to win the virtual national and then the
Yeah.
real thing.
Yeah. I'm staying away. I actually read into the Exeter form a bit more brutally. The heavy ground obviously important, but like when you look at the notes and when you watch the highlights of the race, like it was prominent, it looked really good for the odds that it was, but then it just, the second it was challenged, it really started to lose ground. And they did kind of, you could tell they were riding it along with a view of finishing the race, and then they pulled it up 3 out, and I don't know, it ran off a lower weight. I think it was 9'11", 9 stone 11, rather than a terrorist incident. And now it's running off 10-6. So for me, at 20-1, I don't see the value, even if I see the history. So yeah, it's a stay away from me.
If I were picking off silks, though, I think I do like the silks on Potter's Corner.
A lot of people will be picking based on that selection, so you might have swayed them with that argument. Another experienced horse, although first time racing at Aintree, is number 24, Class Conti, another Mullins. You two so far have both liked a Mullins selection. This one falls again into that category. I can't see any reason to believe it's suddenly going to make this huge step up. I'm going to assume you're not making two Mullins selections, but is it a horse that either of you like?
No, for me, factored out fairly early. Again, it hits the sweet spot of the age and kind of weight. I think there's some good horses at the lower end of the weight this year for sure. But I don't think this is kind of one of the higher brow quality ones that Mullins has. And I think having Hayes on as like a third choice kind of was telling in that respect. And considering his pedigree in it, I quickly went off the Mullins horses as I went further down. So yeah, this one I stayed away from as well.
Yeah, with Sam's statement of the last time Mullins has won, normally you'd say pick all the Mullins and hope one of them wins, but chances are none of them might win. So with his luck in this, so not a good option here in this race.
Well, if you don't like Mullins, maybe you'll like Denise Foster horse, because number 25 is Milan native, 2020 Kim Muir winner. Disappointing at Cheltenham last time. And I never want to be someone who overreacts to the previous performance, because it was a popular selection going into Cheltenham. That being said, the jumping, there were so many issues with its jumping in that performance that it's difficult for me to then make it a Grand National selection next time. It is one of those where I could very easily see myself being proven wrong, because there are a lot of things to like. There are a lot of things to like about it, but just because of those big jumping question marks from Cheltenham, I think either it could fall, or in the very least, it will just fall away from the pace and have too much to do in between the jumps. So it's not a selection for me.
Now, I said I only had 3 selections, but now as we go through, I'm adding a fourth, and it is Milan native here. And I'm going to give you the reason why I can argue against what you're saying is a very good fact. After that race,
I know one of them that you might give, which is this is going to be its second run since its wind up.
Yes. Now this is the horse that I'm picking for my second race off a wind up. But that's actually not the main reason. The main reason is you're right. It didn't jump well at Cheltenham. But after the race, the vet said it had lost a shoe mid-race. So we talk about you trying to do the Grand National, and I'd like to see you do the Grand National with the one shoe on and see how much worse it makes you.
I don't think being barefoot would have any impact on my performance.
But no, I think obviously for a horse that's got to be weighing into the fact of how poorly it did jump. And I think it's, again, a Gordon Elliott horse that now is trained by Denise Foster. Second time off a wind up. I really like that. Won the Muir, so it's got the form, and I think it could do well if the jumping was because of the shoe and not an actual bad jumping horse, which time will tell. But I'm going to bump it up to one of my selections. It's still the fourth, but I'm tempted now because you're right. I think I have to take a horse coming off a second wind up. So this is the one I'm taking.
You don't have to. It's not like no one's going to force you.
I live by my rules.
I mean, for me, I just looked at the kind of value proposition of what 28-1 was going to give me versus what I've seen around it. And, when you look at other horses that I think jump really fluently that I've seen at 33s and 40s, it was harder and harder to justify looking at the kind of more potential elements of this horse rather than the actualities of it. And so I kind of stayed away. But it's interesting, in its past, it's run against Disco Rama, I had written down, which is obviously another horse in this race. So it's had some interesting wins and runs in its past, but I've only really got the right now, I guess, to deal with in that point. And the last time out was a little bit too much to bear for me to see it at 28-1 when I see better value in horses that are better priced or higher priced.
Well, you mentioned Disco Rama there, Sam. It's actually the next horse, number 26, Disco Rama, currently priced at around 16-1. Now, I have to admit, there's a lot of reasons to be tempted by Disco Rama. But for a horse that hasn't won since November of 2018, I find it difficult to then back it in the Grand National at 16-1. And it even seems to be being backed a little bit, so it might be a little bit shorter on the day. And for me, I would need this horse to be at a significantly bigger price. There's just a moment in time where you have to wonder if a horse really wants to win. And in the Grand National, you'll need to dig deep to win in all likelihood. And I definitely don't want to go over the last with Disco Rama as my selection in a group of 5 or 6, suddenly battling it out in that long run-in the Grand National, and have a horse that doesn't know how to actually stick its neck in front at the crucial moment. So for that reason and that reason alone, if this is its first victory in 3 years, then that's quite the achievement. But I won't be the one putting actual money down and hoping that that's the case.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a difficult horse to kind of explore. I was actually reading some interesting notes on Paul Nolan, because obviously this is his kind of really good chance. And he was basically saying it's a weird horse. Like, he's really confident in it and he really thinks it's got a good shot. But he was saying that it's this unfortunate situation where the horse really wants to put its head out in front, but the way it runs, that's exactly what you don't want to do with this horse. So you kind of have to just like suffer a little bit with the horse. But he believes it's due a lot of luck. It did run off a pretty brutal 11 stone 10 in the national last time out. Now, obviously, it's a lot better off in the weights. I think it's only like 10.6. And that's pretty huge for an 8-year-old to have such a drop down. There's a really interesting proposition with it, but I kind of agree with Eddie. Like, it is a slightly weird price for what is just an interesting proposition, in my opinion. So I think you may have like a future national winner here, in the next 3 or 4 years. But I there's not enough for me to go on to justify 16-1 at the moment.
It needs a 5-year winless streak before it can win the Grand National. That's going to be the key to victory. And then it's going to be really low in the weights. They are playing the long game here.
Like a really like malnourished horse, kind of just going in.
Might
like
have they might
4 stone 8.
stick balloons under it. It might be that done that badly. Now, speaking of another horse that's been around for a while, I think number 27 is Vieux Lion Rouge. Currently priced at 40 to 1. Another horse that I'm simply going to rule out just because of the fact that I don't think the jumping is reliable. That's really the only reason. Again, I suppose if you have a red theme, you could make a few selections in this one. You've got Definitely Red, you've got Vieux Lion Rouge. So,
and they're both too old.
Also true, they both fall into Sam has already dismissed any 12-year-olds, says they don't have a chance. We know Sam likes them younger, and he's applying that to his Grand National selections. And so we'll have to say this 12-year-old doesn't have a chance.
I'm tipping up this horse.
Oh, you're going to go?
Wait!
A second.
You told us 12 is too old, and now you're going to tip a 12-year-old.
I'm tipping up a 40 to 1 each way. This is an each way place, right? But one of the metrics, so I look at, a number of metrics. Obviously, I try to look at just generally the best horse with the best runner form going in. I try to look at the weights because, sometimes the lower in weight, the better. And some of the horses I've done really well with have won on lower weights. But another thing is just looking at how many horses have run over national fences or had the opportunities. This horse is a serial runner of the Beaches Chase. I think has run it maybe last 5 times in a row, maybe, in which it's run over like the Aintree fences. So it has that pedigree, which is great. There's another horse that I really like that's going to be a reserve. And unfortunately, it got announced today that it probably won't be running because of the way the reserves works. But this horse got beaten in the Welsh National by Secret Reprieve recently over the national fences. But watching the 2020 Beaches in December, I actually think, Eddie, I had a different take on its jumping. I think that it was incredibly consistent over the national fences.
Consistently shit.
Consistently inconsistent. No, I actually think it ran really well. And what was great is that the jumping was really consistent throughout, and it pulled away at the end. And it won really handsomely, and it beat was it Kimberlite Kite? I can't remember the name of the horse now, but it beat it really well. And what I like about it is that it's old, but it is 10 stone 5. It's been nicely handicapped because that was done before its run. And I just think you've got a horse here that knows exactly what to do around the national fences. Granted, it goes a little bit against my logic, but the more I read into it, the more I saw value. And there it is. There's my each way value, is this horse. So, yeah.
Well, I guess you picked a horse that's consistently inconsistent, and your rules for selecting horses is also consistently inconsistent. So at least there is some consistency in that.
But isn't that an issue?
Yes, and that's the reason why it won't win. Now we can turn our attentions to number 28, Cloth Cap. Currently 9 to 2, so has been as short as 4 to 1, which is an incredibly short price for a Grand National runner. Only rivaled by the price of Tiger Roll. If you look historically, only in modern times, only rivaled by the price of Tiger Roll in 2019, who was 4 to 1 and did win, but has the chances of going off the shortest price of any Grand National runner in modern history. The only horse priced in single figures. There's good reason for that. In the weights, it's incredibly well treated. It's 14 pounds in. It absolutely dominated the field last time out. It's going to be incredibly well suited by the firmer ground. It jumps well. It's got great pace. It gets away quickly from the fences, which for the Grand National is a key. All signs point to it to being the standout selection in this race. I mean, anyone backing Cloth Cap, you have good reason to do so. And if you back a winner of a horse race at 4-1, 9-2, maybe even 5-1 on the day, you won't be unhappy about the fact that you've had very good returns for your bet. But I can't back a horse in the Grand National at this short of a price. And so for that reason, I'm staying away. But there is every chance that it could win.
What you've said there, my question to you both was going to be, can you truly back a horse with that many levels of variables at a 4-1 shot? No, I don't think you can. It is the best horse in the race, or at least it's the most it has the potential to be the most devastating, I think, because also it has a lot of good form against some fantastic horses like I Write, it's beaten Milan Native, it's beaten Ballyoptic, Taking Risks, it's beaten so many people in the field, but also some really good formed runners from Cheltenham as well. I can't back it. That, like, you've got 39 other runners, it's going into 30 fences, and you're expecting it to run as like a 4-1 shot. There's too many variables that will stop it. And it may pull away at the start. It may be the easiest win you'll ever see in your life. But I've seen enough Grand Nationals to say that that very rarely is the case. And so for me, 4-1's too short.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's so short that a lot of the tips we've made today, you'd make more money on the each way bet of that horse than Cloth Cap even winning. So it's just way too short for me. For a horse, I mean, Tiger Roll was this price, but Tiger Roll was dominant the year before, and every sign pointed it to it almost being, like an easy win, like a shoe-in. This is not the same thing. Yes, it has looked great in its last two races. Yes, it is 14 pounds well in, but it doesn't have that reputation that Tiger Roll had coming into 2019. So I can't back it. I think there's a lot of other horses out there that you can back it in each way and get a better win just getting in the top 5, 6, whatever your firm's going to offer you.
You raise a very valid point there, that if assuming that you're getting 1 to 4, there are actually only 5 horses in which you would get smaller returns on them placing in an each way bet, or I suppose you could do a place only and get similar odds than you would on Cloth Cap to win. That being said, maybe Cloth Cap is more of a certainty to win than any other individual horse is to place. I mean, that's the calculation you have to make in your head. And fundamentally, I would say that's true. Like, you can make a stronger argument for Cloth Cap winning than I think you can make for any of the opposition being kind of a lock to place. But the price is just too short. I think if you want to back Cloth Cap, in a way, I'll be putting something on Cloth Cap. I'll throw it in an accumulator just so that on the day I can have the horse that is very likely to win the Grand National as a selection. But I will be throwing it into a weekend accumulator just to boost it with an additional, with a sort of 4-1 that makes the odds on my, treble or fourfold look really nice. But you are brave. That when you tune in to watch the Grand National, there's going to be a moment where they say someone's just, I mean, I guess they can't do it at the moment where they do someone's just walked into a bookies because the the lockdown, the sort of restrictions prevent someone from doing that. But it's going to be someone's just placed a 50,000 pound bet online with Ladbrokes on Cloth Cap at 5-1. It's gonna happen at some point. More power to whoever those people are, but there are safer options than backing a horse at 4-1 to 5-1 in the Grand National. Now up next, another horse where the name is likely to make it popular with some people, and that is number 29, Cabaret Queen. I think there's probably some people out there who hoped that their musical singing career was going to take off and it never did, and this is the horse that might make their dreams come true. It's a big price. So if you do like a little bit of cabaret, you're going to be able to attend a lot of cabaret if it comes in, because it's 125-1. Another Mullins horse, only 9 though. So it meets one of Sam's rules, but not one of the others. I don't know how that works anymore. Not a lot of reasons to think it can win the Grand National, but do either of you have an argument for it?
Not for me.
Well, we'll take that as a firm no then. Up next, number 30, Manila Celebration. Unseated the rider in the Beecher Chase in December. Has had a wind up. So doesn't meet Frank's requirement. This is the first time since the wind up. So
It's not going to know. It has no
It's-
idea that it's wind opted.
yeah. Now either that or think of how if it wins the Grand National now, then think of how good it will be next time out. I mean, the sky's the limit if it storms home in Aintree on Saturday.
Yep.
Currently priced at around 66 to 1. I think you can actually, it's 100 to 1 now. I take that back. It has not a lot of market confidence in it. Won a couple of races early in the season, but again, has had questionable jumping in recent performances. So for that reason, I'm going to rule it out.
Yeah, I'm ruling out this one, and people take note. Don't get confused by the Manila in this name. If you're looking for Manila Times coming up later, don't make that mistake.
Yes, it's true. And that I'm sure one or two people will fall into that trap when they're quickly trying to get their bet on before the national goes off, or they can't quite remember what the name is. And I'm sure one person out there will get on Manila Celebration at 100 to 1 and then think they somehow got one over their bookie because Manila Times is 10 to 1. And there'll be someone who feels incredibly smug for about 90 seconds until they realize the mistake that they've made. Now, boxing fans, Canelo, number 31, could be a popular selection with them. Recent winner at Weatherby back in December. This would be the performance of its career. It's only an 8-year-old. Form all looks relatively good. It would have to be a major step up, but I'm actually going to make it my second each way selection, just on the grounds that this is a little bit of an unknown quantity. And if it continues its upward curve, then there's every chance it runs a good race. And at 40 to 1, I think it's got a decent each way claims. So that's my second selection. And
Wow,
with that, we could
not mine.
I know the looks on your face told me that it was just me, and so we can from 1,000-yard stares we can move on to number 32, the Long Mile, who has 2 grade B handicap chase wins, but was recently beaten by Burroughs Saint and Acapella Bourgeois. Now, you both liked Acapella Bourgeois, so maybe on that ground you're tempted by a horse that is now priced at 80 to 1. Does it interest either of you?
No. It definitely comes from that race, that Fairy House race, where I consider a lot of form to go with it. It's kind of adequately weighted, really. It ran that race at 11.2. It's now running at 10.4, which is really good. Really young horse as well, which is something really interesting about it. It's like a 7-year-old in the Grand National is quite a rare sight. But for me, I just think the horses above it have a better pedigree and a better experience. So again, I think there's a good horse in the making here, but not yet.
Well, if that doesn't tempt you, maybe you'll be interested in another 80 to 1 priced horse, which is number 33, Give Me a Copper, trained by Paul Nichols, ridden by Harry Cobden. So a lot to like in terms of trainer and jockey selections at such a big price. Shown glimpses of incredible performances, including, first time out this season finished second, but was pulled up last time out and didn't jump fluently. I think it's a real gamble. It's a hit or miss performer, and now you're putting it in a situation where it's more likely to miss. So I think the 80 to 1 price is probably fair. For that reason, I'm staying away.
Yeah, but the Cobden booking's interesting. Jockey wise, I think Nichols Cobden is a good combination. Interesting to see it at an 80-1 with Nichols to have that kind of jockey combo. So interesting booking, but yeah, I agree with you. Wildly inconsistent. So 80-1. I'll probably stay away from my own bets personally anyway.
Number 34, a horse I'm always unsure whether it's Farclas or Farclas.
Farclas.
Farclas. Second to the Shunter at Cheltenham. The Shunter was one of the stars of the Cheltenham Festival, obviously, with nailing that £100,000 bonus. Looks good in terms of how it's weighted, 20-1. So you're starting to look at a horse that's towards the top of the market. 7-year-old. So as you touched on, Sam, that's a young horse for making a Grand National appearance. With that in mind, maybe this is just giving it some Aintree experience, and it's one to keep an eye out in next year or the year after. A lot to like about it, but this is the most difficult test of its career, and this is a big step up. So huge unknown quantity, but I could see why it might interest a few.
Yeah, it interests me. So this is my last selection off the board. So I got a little quiz for you guys, Sam, to follow up on your little pop quiz. Farclas won the Triumph Hurdle. Do you know the last horse to win the Triumph Hurdle and then to win the Grand National? Don't got to look too far.
Don't have to look that far back?
At all.
Tiger Roll?
Tiger Roll.
Tiger Roll. Okay.
Yep. So Tiger Roll also won the Triumph Hurdle and then came on to win the Grand National. So Farclas looking to do the same thing under the same colors. You're right. I'm tipping this horse because of its potential. It has a lot of potential. It's racing in good races. You hit it home with, coming to second to the Shunter. It was a very good race, but it has no form anywhere near this distance. So it is a little bit of a crapshoot. And this could be one where they kind of knew all along it was going to stay and it comes out at 20-1 and looks great, or it pulls up halfway because it definitely can't hit the distance. So it's definitely a crapshoot, and it's not my main selection, which would be Acapella Bourgeois, but I think it's worth in each way on Farclas just because it is a very good horse. And you're right, it may be for a future Grand National, but I'll tip it to hit the frame in this one.
Better to be a year early than a year late, Frank.
Words of wisdom. Thank you.
Some things that'll get you in jail. Some things that'll get you in jail.
Yeah, remember those. Those are words of wisdom for you, Sam.
It's a really interesting proposition, this horse. I think it's quite an exciting proposition, but I think the distance worries me a little bit with this one. What's interesting to note, though, is it's really well weighted relative to what it has run off in previous runs. Interestingly enough, it usually runs in races with Manila Times. It gets beaten usually by Manila Times as well, and in itself, Manila Times also doesn't win those races either. So as you've seen it had a win, but the last 2 seconds, for example, it's lost out. So there's kind of form above it, but then also above that as well, that kind of make it, I think the value is a little bit too short on a 20-1 shot, given that, but I do think it's a very interesting proposition. I do have it as a kind of like watch, but it won't factor into my betting, but it will be a horse I've certainly selected to watch as well. But I'll watch them all, right, by definition. But that one specifically, I'll look out for. In
you might not.
Jumping.
That's one of the that's one of the challenges of the Grand National. Is first challenge is finding your horse, and then you hope you find it. You hope you find it before you get told. And faller at that race,
yeah. You just have to sometimes just wait for the commentator, and I find it incredible how they commentate on this race.
Yes.
It is
switching.
Really,
the switching. I think it's almost adds to the excitement. The fact that over the course of the race they hand over to each other. I always find because the new person always comes in with kind of one-upping the enthusiasm because the race has progressed a little bit further, and so I always find and like they have to do the really rushed acknowledgement of the fact that a handover is going to, and now we're going to this person for, and then like that kind of adds to the kind of pressure that you feel mounting.
No, the commentary is definitely one of the special parts of Aintree. I thoroughly recommend putting it on if you can.
Now we get to my main selection of the Grand National, number 35, Manila Times. Not to be confused with Manila Celebration. Remember that. Do not mix up the two, because Manila Times is currently priced at 10-1, riding for the star of the Cheltenham Festival, ridden by even by the star of the Cheltenham Festival, Rachel Blackmore. Has looked basically better each time out this season. And
the horse or Rachel Blackmore?
Both, you could argue.
Yeah.
You know? And I mean, and we're all going to look forward to seeing Rachel Blackmore pulling out her now iconic fist celebration, having just won the Grand National. So I think we've got to prepare for that. We've got to prepare the statues that will be made in years to come. It's actually, as much as I like the fact that you have an incredibly informed jockey, I do, and a good jockey, at the same time, the storyline of Rachel Blackmore following up all of that Cheltenham success by winning the Grand National, the combination seems so unlikely that I see that almost as a negative, even though it has no impact on the chances of the horses itself. But it's just so progressive. And I think on that ground, it has as good of a chance as any. And so it's my selection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid selection, right? You got the Bromhead and Blackmore together. You have a horse, its last outings were second, first, 16th, second, first, second. So overall, pretty consistent. All around 3 miles or up. So, you know, the distance doesn't seem to be as terrible of an issue. But you're adding an extra mile there. So that's obviously going to be a little bit of a question mark. But it's a good pick. It's not mine, but I think it's a very solid pick for a good number of reasons.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid pick. The only, I have two slight issues, I guess. I worry a little bit about how much that's actually its true value because of the Bromhead Rachel Blackmore aspect of it, because I tried to look into like what it has done, and the one it won was a slight drop down. It was at Listowel. It isn't kind of the best racing, but when you look at the ones where it's run at Leopardstown under pretty good racing, granted, and very good, competent competition, one of the things that always seemed to come up is that it tracked well, ran well, and then just at the end, it gave no impression as it was kind of brought up against someone. So there's a slight concern about if the National is going to be quite close going into maybe the last 2 or 3 jumps with a pretty long run-in on the National, I might worry about a horse that may have a bit more stamina, or whether this is a horse that just doesn't know how to get its neck in front. It's a very, very minor point on, well, it could be a potentially major point, but it's a very minor flaw on what is a pretty impressive horse, pretty impressive jockey booking. And I see why it is right up there in the betting. I just worry maybe if it's a little bit too deflated in pricing because of the booking.
No, I think that's valid. You're definitely, by the risk of picking a horse that has such, it's like going back in time and picking any AP McCoy horse in the Grand National. You weren't getting real value there because just the name recognition was going to, it's like backing horses at Ascot that have Frankie Dettori on board. You're kind of losing probably 10% of the value just on that basis. And what you have to then weigh up is that selection making up for that lost value with the increased chances of winning? With Rachel Blackmore, undoubtedly a very, very good jockey, not quite at that sort of AP McCoy or Frankie Dettori level where you could really feel like you know that it will deliver. But this could be when she cements that status as kind of the leading jumps jockey, which is you have to admit, at the moment, there's kind of a void since the retirement. I mean, fundamentally, since the retirement of Ruby Walsh, I would say there's been a bit of a void for that kind of that claim. Definitely since Barry Garrity then retired. I think now you've got a kind of some very good jockeys out there, but they're all vying for that top spot, and this could be where Rachel Blackmore claims it.
Yeah, I agree. We're really only looking at what Scudamore and Johnson actually retired, didn't he, recently? So Scudamore's probably he's been a consistent name. He's not been a marquee name. But interesting you mentioned AP McCoy, because obviously this horse is McManus colours as well. So certainly a bit of continued heritage or legacy in that one. So
yes, and another horse that
is that it?
being no, just another horse.
Yes, there's another horse.
There is another.
And then we have the field.
And another horse being ridden by a female jockey is Sub Lieutenant, being ridden by Tabitha Worsley, which is actually trained by her mother, Georgie Howell. This seems like a stretch based on performances. I think it's difficult to make a case as to why it will get in the running. I mean, it's placed on its last few outings, but not really shown any great form. It's 100-1. Now, maybe this will be the Monmo moment, but I don't think so.
Yeah, not much from me here.
So I guess on that, we can move on to number 37, Hogan's Heights. I guess if there's any lovers of Hogan's Heroes, this might be where they're going. Won the Grand Sefton in 2019. Basically hasn't raced much since, although it was well beaten in the cross-country chase last time out. Currently priced at 50-1. Does it interest either of you?
Not for me.
Nope. Well, we can move on then from a double no to a double shuffle, number 38. Shown moments of brilliance, you'd have to say. It's one of those horses that I think even at a bigger price, so it's currently 125-1. Took me a while to find because it was right at the bottom of the list. At 125-1, I will say of the horses that are priced at 100-1 or bigger, I think you can make the best case for double shuffle. So if that's the unique criteria that you want to use to make your Grand National selection, if you want a triple figure horse to back, then double shuffle would be the one for me. But I don't really see why it will get in the mix. But of the very, very big prices, it seems like it actually has shown glimpses of being a top class horse at different moments over the course of its career. And we can stick in the triple figures with another 125-1 priced horse, which is number 39, Emmy Debois. Finished second on three of its last four starts, but hasn't raced at anything near this type of competition. And again, you're hoping for a miracle if you're picking horses at this price. There's a reason why they are as big as they are, and it could be a bit of fun. Maybe you'll have the excitement of 6 out. It's in the first 5 or 6, but fundamentally, I don't think you're going to get much joy out of backing Emmy Debois.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at all the form, it's placed twice. It's placed second twice this season, which kind of raises a few eyelids when you look at it and you think, wow, why is it 125-1? But you then look at the quality of the competition, but also where it's running and what it's running against. And this is an insane step up. Very well weighted, definitely at the end of the kind of on the lighter side of the weights. But I wasn't seeing it. So it was a bit of a stay away from me.
Now This is a horse that will bring back some good memories for a few, which is number 40, Black Lion, which finished fourth in the Grand National and won the Beecher Chase in 2017. Unfortunately, hasn't won since then. So you really are hoping that this horse rolls back the years on this time out.
I wish so much that this horse wasn't like 66-1. If this was like 100-1, 125, and don't shout at me about the 12-year-old thing. This is pure nostalgia with this horse, is that I just remember the times where it was like just running against like Native River in like 2017, 2016. It was like Gold Cup. It was going to the national. I think it even kind of ran really well against like Bristol de Mai all those years ago as well. I remember like it ran really well in the, it was the national like 4 or 5 years ago where One for Arthur won. It ran really well. I just think it's a fantastic horse. It's got a lot of nostalgia for me. I really just wish it was a longer odd than 66 when I'm sat there back in a 33 with genuine chance. And then I got a 66 where I'm like, oh, well, 4 years ago it did something. I needed it to be longer to do any sort of justification, but yeah, I get if I backed it, it's pure nostalgia.
I get what you're saying. At the same time, if you think it has any sort of a live chance, 66-1 does seem big enough to make it interesting, even on an each way basis. You're going to be kicking yourself if Black Lion ends up even just placing and you turned it down because you thought I would have only gone
put a couple of quid on it. I now have to put a couple of quid on it, right? So I will. Yeah. I will be putting money on Black Lion, mainly because also about 4 years ago, it beat the horse I tipped up, Leon Rouge, in the Beaches. So interesting.
Yeah. So, obviously it was fourth in the Grand National 2017. Then 2018, it was pretty high up there. I think it was like 12-1, 14-1 when the race went off. So it was pretty well fancied because at that time, I think Tiger Roll was only 10-1 when it won. So it was fancied then. It got brought down. So obviously not the best result. But since then has not done much basically after that. Changed trainers. Hasn't looked great. But it's definitely down in the weights. So if you think it's got anything left in the tank, it is very much down on the weights from when it got fourth in 2017. So I don't know. Does a 12-year-old have it? Sam says no, but then picks two of them. So I don't know what that means.
I was going to say, should I just go all in now with the...
I think you should just back... I think you got to back every 12-year-old now.
I've just got to be careful with sound bites here when I talk about 12-year-olds. So like, should I just back every 12-year-old in this race? I'm starting to think that there might be a semi-reality here. Who else would I be missing then? Sub-Lieutenant would be another one I would back. Oof. Oh, I'm starting to doubt my selections now. No.
Taking risks. You know what, Sam? If you're going to be taking risks on 12-year-olds, you might as well take them all.
Might as well bet on a horse called that in a Grand National.
But I think out of the 12-year-olds, you can make a case for Black Lion with its previous form and just being so low in the weights compared to what it was when it was super competitive. It could have one last shot in there.
No, definitely. No, definitely. You never know. I mean, that's what's magical about the Grand National is as much as we can go through and look horse by horse and assess each one of their chances on the day, almost anything could happen. And I know people will say that about, I know people will say that about every horse race and they'll point to incredible surprises here and there. But really the Grand National is the only major race I can think of where you could not just outright dismiss the chances of a horse. Unlikely.
And just so everyone considers, the Irish Grand National ran a couple of weeks ago and it was won by 150-1 winner. So these things do happen and they've happened very recently. So
and not so much, I guess, more recently because of the changes they've made to the course, but you have a course that's notorious for so many falls that you could just be in the line of fire and get brought down, be in the pack looking great, and all of a sudden the horse next to you falls and takes you out. And that's obviously another risk of the Grand National where anything can happen.
Yeah. And before we wrap it up, I suppose there are 4 horses that could run depending on withdrawals. 2 of them, I think, as interesting as Costa Rico and Fagan are, perhaps they'll end up surprising us, but they don't seem to be in with particularly live chances. They also need 3 or 4 horses to be withdrawn respectively, which could well happen. But there is every chance they don't run. Some neck only needs a single horse to be withdrawn before the 1 p.m. deadline on Friday. Its odds currently around 25-1. Ran well in the cross-country chase. Personally, I'm not a huge fan, but you could make an argument for it. I suppose the most interesting one of the potential runners is Secret Reprieve, which won the Welsh National this year. A lot to like about it. It's 14-1. So obviously people are thinking that if it does get in, it has as good of a chance as basically anything. The thing going against it is the fact, as Sam has touched on previously, it is only 7, and a 7-year-old has not won the Grand National since 1940. So it would have to make history in a way, but not impossible.
I will say that Secret Reprieve was going to be one of my, because I actually did this like a day or so ago before they did the kind of final declarations. So Secret Reprieve, if it got in as a reserve, like I was looking at the notes from Evan Williams since the national winner, and he was saying like, I'd rather sweat out going in at the weight it's going to and may run rather than being like hammered with like 11 stone 6 and it definitely running, which all that suggested to me was like what they know is the deal they're going to get from the handicapper for this race is too good of a deal for the horse. So of course they really wanted to see it. But as Eddie mentioned, like won the Welsh National. I really liked it. It would have been really well favored in the weights. It just ran so well the last time out, and it just got announced this morning, so Thursday morning in the UK, that it will be the 2nd reserve, and that all but says it's not going to run. There's such a doubt now that it won't, and I think the yard have even come out and basically said it's not going to run ultimately because so many horses would have to drop out. But it would have been my bet.
2.
Yeah, we know the number.
It is 2, but
it's a
still,
lot. It's unlikely, but yes, it's not some astronomical figure.
No, but it would have been maybe my tip if it had gone into it. And it, like you say, the fact that
this is a strong move. This is just really covering your bases, hedging your bets. Just on the off chance it does race, you get to still pull the "I told you so."
And then I will say this now: if it races, it is my tip. Right, that's what I'm saying. But you can't back a horse if it's not racing. So if it doesn't race, my horse
you just lose.
Acapella.
Hey,
yeah. Well, you can, can't you? You can.
I went against a horse that I knew wouldn't finish. I said Tiger Roll would not win this year's Grand National, and I am a winner.
I guess this is the appropriate moment to congratulate Frank on the incredible prediction of taking the field against Tiger Roll in the Grand National. I mean, the stakes were just so high. The odds were just so short. It really was a bold prediction.
Backed up by the fact that I also took it at Cheltenham to win. So that's how confident I was in being able to win at Cheltenham, but still not win the Grand National.
You only bet on it at Cheltenham because you'd selected it to not win the Grand National. So it was, I know the logic that went into the Cheltenham selection.
Yeah.
And it was
that cross-country win has annoyed me so much, considering now what it's just gone and done at Aintree and what it did before Cheltenham. Like I was all for Easy's Land, and it's so infuriating. This horse has done nothing.
Get rid of Easy's Land, Sam.
Turns up and then just turns up and does nothing. It would have been interesting. I don't know if it's running at the Aintree Festival, but it'd be interesting to see it run somewhere that's not Cheltenham. Easy's Land, just a note. Well,
it will probably be seen running around sort of Central Park or something, pulling a carriage pretty soon. So you could keep an eye out for it there. Did you see what the Tiger Roll camp were saying going into today's race? that it had
0% chance.
no chance of winning. It's not a grade 1 horse. It just absolutely had stood no chance that, even though it was a race where it was difficult to pick a winner, all of those horses were a class above, and that it simply didn't deserve to be racing in that kind of sphere. I guess kind of proven right by the end result, although I think it ran on for 4th, perhaps. So I guess maybe not quite as bad as they thought, but it was absolutely miles behind the winner.
It did race on for 4th, but it was only a short 48 lengths back. Sorry. From 3rd, it was 92 lengths back from the winner.
Close. So I guess that wraps up our Grand National preview. Our selections are in there. We'll have to see if any one of us has managed to find a needle in the haystack and pick the winner there. In all likelihood, Cloth Cap just storms home, and all of this preview and all of these previews and predictions were entirely pointless because the winner was there right in front of us. But we'll have to see what happens on Saturday.